Princess Charlotte gave a secret signal to the royal guard, so he instantly broke protocol. Birds chirped merrily in the trees, their songs mingling with the gentle rustling of leaves. Inside the palace, a different kind of bustle filled the halls. Servants moved quietly but efficiently, carrying trays of tea, arranging flowers, and preparing the rooms for the day's events. It was the kind of morning that seemed ordinary to most, yet for Princess Charlotte, it held a special kind of excitement, a sense of anticipation that could make even the grandest palace feel like a place of adventure. Princess Charlotte, though young, had already become well known for her lively personality. She had a curiosity that often led her to explore corners of the palace where visitors rarely went, from the sunlit kitchens to the quiet, echoing libraries. She loved learning about everything: the history of her family, the stories behind every painting on the walls, and even the intricate details of royal traditions. But despite her interest in learning, she had a spark of mischief that sometimes made her moments of royal protocol a little more interesting. On this particular morning, Charlotte was preparing for a very special occasion. A formal royal engagement had been scheduled, one of those events where everything had to be perfect. The guards stood in precise formation, their polished boots gleaming under the morning sun, their faces serious as they waited for the princess and her family to appear. Every movement in the palace was guided by tradition, and the rules were strict. Each gesture, each bow, and each step had its place. But Charlotte, despite understanding the importance of these rules, was not someone to simply follow them without a hint of creativity. As she dressed in her elegant gown, a soft shade of lavender that matched the morning sky, Charlotte thought about the event ahead. She could hear her parents in the next room discussing schedules and speeches, their voices polite but formal. Charlotte, however, was already planning her own small surprises. She had been thinking for days about a secret way to make the day a little more special for herself, a way to interact with the guards in a playful manner that no one else would notice. It was a game, really, a challenge to see if one trusted guard could understand her without anyone else realizing. Her hair was carefully braided, the way the palace stylists always did for formal occasions, but Charlotte added a small personal touch. A tiny bow tucked behind her ear, just enough to catch the light when she moved. She smiled to herself in the mirror, imagining the fun she might have. To most people, she looked every bit the proper princess, poised, graceful, and composed. But Charlotte knew that beneath that perfect exterior, she carried a spark of cleverness and curiosity that sometimes led her to bend the rules, even if just for a moment. Down in the grand hall, the royal guards were in position, their posture impeccable. Each one had been trained to maintain absolute discipline, to follow orders without hesitation, and to keep the royal family safe while preserving the dignity of every event. Among them was a young officer who had caught Charlotte's attention in the past. He was diligent, attentive, and most importantly, someone who seemed to notice the small details that others might miss. Over time, Charlotte had found ways to communicate little gestures and signals to him, simple codes that only they understood. To the outside world, he was just another guard. To Charlotte, he was a trusted friend and an accomplice in her small adventures. The day's event began as scheduled. The royal family appeared in the main courtyard, greeted by an audience of dignitaries, visitors, and curious onlookers. The air was filled with the quiet hum of conversation, camera shutters clicking, and the soft rustle of dresses and suits. Charlotte moved gracefully among the crowd, her eyes scanning for familiar faces while also keeping an eye on the young guard she trusted. She knew that the moment would come when she could test her secret plan, and anticipation made her steps lighter, her smile a little brighter. As she approached the central area where speeches and greetings were to take place, Charlotte's mind was alert and playful. She observed the details around her, the way the sunlight caught the edges of the marble columns, the way the flowers were arranged in perfect symmetry, and the subtle movements of the guards stationed near the edges of the courtyard. Every element of the scene was a part of the performance of royal life, but Charlotte saw it as more than just protocol. To her, it was a stage, and she was both a performer and a director, orchestrating moments that no one else would notice. Charlotte's attention, however, was not on the crowd or the decorations. Her focus was on the young officer who stood near the main entrance. He was alert, scanning the crowd as if ready for any possible issue, Yet he also carried an air of calmness that Charlotte had learned to rely upon. Over time, she had discovered that he had a keen sense of observation and a gentle understanding of her personality. If anyone could understand a secret signal without words, it was him. The ceremony began with speeches and formal introductions proceeding in perfect order. Guests approached the royal family to offer greetings, and Charlotte responded with polite bows and smiles. But behind her composed demeanor, she was preparing for the moment she had been imagining all morning. Her hand, lightly resting at her side, was poised to send a subtle gesture, one that would speak louder than words but remain invisible to everyone else. It was a secret she had practiced, a small motion she could perform without anyone noticing, and she trusted that the young guard would see it and act accordingly. Charlotte's mind wandered for a brief moment as she thought about the significance of such small gestures. Even in a world dominated by strict rules and formal procedures, she realized, there was room for creativity, for small acts of connection, and for moments of playful rebellion. She understood that these small moments were powerful, not because they defied the rules, but because they respected them while also adding a personal touch. It was her way of making the day her own, of showing that even a princess, bound by centuries of tradition, could create her own stories within the larger narrative of royal life. As the event continued, Charlotte's eyes met the young officer's. For an instant, a silent understanding passed between them, a recognition that something small, yet important, was about to happen. The guard's posture remained impeccable, but his eyes hinted at awareness, at readiness to respond in a way that only he and Charlotte could understand. It was a rare moment, one of trust and subtle communication, where the ordinary rules of ceremony could bend just enough to create a shared secret. Charlotte's heart raced slightly, not from fear, but from excitement. She loved the challenge of communicating without words, of knowing that a single gesture could speak volumes. She felt a surge of confidence as she prepared to make her move, imagining the small smile she would see on the young officer's face when he realized what she had asked. It was a feeling of empowerment, of control, and of connection, all wrapped up in a moment so fleeting that no one else would notice it. Even as the audience clapped politely and dignitaries exchanged greetings, Charlotte remained in her own world, focused on the intricate dance of signals and responses she had designed. She understood the importance of appearances and protocol, but she also understood that life was richer when small moments of playfulness could coexist with formality. Her mind, quick and imaginative, found joy in the intersection of tradition and creativity, in the ability to communicate a private story within a public performance. By the time the first part of the event concluded, Charlotte had already begun to weave her plan into the unfolding ceremony. Every step, every glance, and every slight movement of her hand was intentional, part of a sequence that only she and her trusted guard could fully appreciate. She moved through the crowd with the grace expected of a princess, but behind her poised exterior, she carried the thrill of anticipation, the knowledge that soon her secret signal would be understood, and the ordinary rhythm of the event would bend to accommodate a tiny act of rebellion, a playful assertion of her own personality. As she prepared for the next segment of the morning, Charlotte felt a quiet satisfaction. The palace, with all its grandeur and strict rules, had become a canvas for her imagination. She was aware of every detail, from the pattern of the marble floors to the placement of each guard, and she understood how to use these details to her advantage. She was both observer and participant, careful to maintain the dignity expected of her while also creating a personal narrative within the larger story of royal life. And so the morning progressed, with Charlotte fully immersed in the ceremonial duties expected of her, yet carrying within her a playful secret that would soon unfold. A small gesture, a private code, and a shared understanding with a guard who had proven himself worthy of her. Trust. The day was ordinary to the untrained eye, but for Charlotte, it was anything but. It was a stage set for creativity, for connection, and for the quiet thrill of bending the rules in a way that no one else would ever notice. By the time the first official greetings ended, Charlotte was ready. Her eyes, sparkling with intelligence and mischief, scanned the area once more, locking briefly with the young officer's gaze. The signal she had been planning all morning was about to be sent, a silent request for him to act in a way that would surprise even the most disciplined observers. It was a moment of anticipation, of trust, and of playful ingenuity, and Charlotte knew that it would mark the beginning of a story that no one outside the palace walls would ever fully understand. A story of a princess, a guard, and a secret signal that could bend the rules. Without breaking them, the young royal guard who had gained Charlotte's trust had been trained to notice details that others might miss. He had spent countless hours observing the princess, learning how she moved, how she smiled, and how her eyes could communicate more than words ever could. Over time, he had realized that Charlotte had a playful mind and a clever way of bending rules without drawing attention. It was a skill he admired, and now it would be tested. The moment for the signal was near, and he stood alert, scanning the surroundings, ready to act if he noticed anything unusual. Charlotte glanced at him from across the courtyard, her eyes flicking ever so slightly. She took a deep breath, careful to maintain her formal posture while allowing her fingers to tap lightly on her wrist in the pattern they had agreed upon. It was subtle enough that no one else could notice, yet clear to the young guard who had been trained to recognize it. For Charlotte, this was a moment of excitement, a tiny act of rebellion against the strict rules of royal protocol, done with elegance and precision. The young officer's eyes widened slightly as he recognized the code. His mind raced, calculating how he could respond without breaking the rigid expectations of his role. Royal protocol allowed little room for improvisation, and yet Charlotte's signal demanded action. He understood immediately what she was asking. A small, discreet gesture that would ease her day, make her more comfortable, and honor the silent bond they had developed over months of shared understanding. He stepped forward ever so slightly, his movements precise, yet gentle, ensuring that his actions would remain unnoticed by the rest of the guards or the audience. The first task was simple, to subtly adjust the position of her gown so it rested more comfortably on her shoulders. A small shift, invisible to the crowd, but one that would make Charlotte feel more at ease as she moved among the dignitaries. Charlotte, sensing his motion, allowed herself the smallest of smiles, invisible to everyone else but full of silent satisfaction. The second part of her request was more delicate. She needed him to be vigilant, not only about the formal aspects of the ceremony but also about the small irritations that could make the day uncomfortable. Loose shoes, a pin that might poke her, the sun in her eyes, or the bustle of the crowd. Each of these was minor, but Charlotte knew that discomfort could disrupt the rhythm of her day. She trusted the young officer completely to anticipate and prevent these problems without drawing attention to himself or her. The guard responded with a quiet, practiced attentiveness. He adjusted his position so that he could shield Charlotte from direct sunlight without it appearing obvious. His hand hovered just near the folds of her dress to prevent it from catching awkwardly as she moved. Each step, each small motion, was a careful balance of obedience to protocol and discreet attention to Charlotte's needs. It was a silent dance, a choreography of trust that the outside world would never notice. Charlotte continued to greet the dignitaries, her voice soft but polite, her smile bright. The audience saw nothing unusual, just the proper conduct expected of a princess. Yet behind the polished exterior, she felt an exhilarating sense of control and playfulness. She had designed this signal for a moment like this, where she could engage her cleverness and creativity without disturbing the decorum of the ceremony. The young officer, understanding her intentions perfectly, moved in harmony with her, anticipating her needs and responding with quiet efficiency. The crowd began to notice subtle signs of Charlotte's energy. There was a sparkle in her eyes that suggested amusement, a lightness in her steps that seemed almost mischievous, yet still perfectly composed. Some observers whispered among themselves, noting that she seemed particularly lively today. But none could see the careful communication unfolding between the princess and her trusted guard. It was a secret story, played out in gestures and movements that only two people could understand. Charlotte's mind wandered briefly as she observed the crowd. She thought about how small acts of ingenuity and understanding could make life richer, even in the most structured environments. Here she was, following centuries of tradition and protocol, yet finding a way to create a personal narrative within the larger story of royal life. The realization brought her a quiet sense of joy. The secret signal, the guard's response, the subtle adjustments that made her day more comfortable. These were small victories, tiny moments of freedom within the confines of ceremony. As the ceremony progressed, Charlotte's signal prompted another series of discreet actions. The guard stepped subtly between her and a group of photographers, ensuring that no sudden movement or glare could disturb her composure. He adjusted the angle of a nearby guard's stance to prevent shadows from falling awkwardly across her gown. Each of these actions, though minute, created a smoother experience for Charlotte, one that allowed her to focus on her interactions rather than minor distractions. Charlotte appreciated the guard's attention. It was more than just following her signal. It was a demonstration of understanding, trust, and teamwork. She had always known that the most effective partnerships relied on unspoken communication, on the ability to anticipate needs and respond with care. In this small, quiet way, she and the guard were partners in ensuring that the event proceeded flawlessly, while also allowing a touch of individuality and playfulness to shine through. The audience continued to applaud politely as Charlotte moved through her duties. Every greeting was met with warmth and precision, every interaction executed flawlessly. Yet behind her composed demeanor, the princess felt a sense of excitement. Each subtle gesture, each anticipatory action by the guard, reinforced the silent bond they shared. It was a delicate balance, maintaining the dignity and poise expected of her while also engaging in this private game of signals and responses. At one point, Charlotte's attention shifted to a minor irritation, a ribbon on her gown that had loosened slightly as she moved. In the strict world of royal protocol, she would not have been able to adjust it herself. But the secret signal she had sent earlier prompted the guard to step closer, discreetly repositioning the ribbon without anyone noticing. Charlotte's relief was quiet but profound. The gesture reinforced her confidence in their silent communication and reminded her of the subtle power of cleverness and foresight. As the morning wore on, Charlotte and the guard continued their silent coordination. Each action, each adjustment, each anticipatory movement reinforced the trust between them. The princess's mind remained alert and playful, always looking for ways to make the day smoother, more comfortable, and more enjoyable, all while maintaining the appearance of perfect decorum. The guard's skill lay not only in his ability to anticipate her needs, but also in his understanding of the importance of discretion. Every movement had to be precise, subtle, and invisible to the casual observer. Charlotte's enjoyment of this quiet collaboration was palpable, even though no one else could see it. She felt a sense of satisfaction in knowing that she had created a moment of personal agency within the formal structure of royal life. The secret signal, the guard's attentive response, and the tiny adjustments that made her day easier were all part of a story that belonged only to them. It was a story of cleverness, trust, and shared understanding, played out against the backdrop of centuries of tradition. The ceremony reached a point where Charlotte had to deliver a brief speech. She stood on the platform, poised and confident, the audience watching intently. Her words were measured and formal, yet there was a subtle warmth in her tone that reflected her playful personality. Behind the scenes, the guard ensured that she was comfortable, adjusting her stance ever so slightly, shielding her from minor distractions, and remaining alert to any potential interruptions. It was a testament to their silent coordination, a demonstration of how small acts of understanding could enhance even the most formal occasions. As Charlotte spoke, she allowed her mind to drift slightly, thinking about the small gestures and signals that had made this day so smooth. She realized that the power of communication went beyond words, beyond protocol, and beyond appearances. A single gesture, when understood and acted upon with care, could transform an ordinary moment into something extraordinary. The guard's ability to recognize and respond to her signal had created a sense of ease and confidence that would have been impossible otherwise. When the speech concluded, the audience erupted in polite applause. Charlotte smiled, gracefully acknowledging the recognition, yet her attention remained partly on the young officer who had been her silent partner throughout the morning. She knew that the story of this day, the sequence of subtle signals and actions, would remain a private memory between them, a shared understanding that no one else could fully appreciate. It was a quiet triumph, a confirmation that even in a world dominated by rules and tradition, cleverness, trust, and subtle communication could create moments of personal freedom and joy. As the ceremony drew to a close, Charlotte allowed herself a final, satisfied glance at the young guard. The secret signal had worked perfectly. The small acts of anticipation, the quiet adjustments, and the playful collaboration had all unfolded seamlessly, invisible to the crowd yet deeply meaningful to both of them. Charlotte felt a sense of accomplishment and delight. She had navigated the formal event with poise, yet she had also created a space for her own creativity, personality, and cleverness to shine through. By the time the royal family departed the courtyard, the audience remained unaware of the quiet story that had unfolded. They had witnessed a flawless ceremony, a composed princess and attentive guards, but they had no idea of the private game of signals and understanding that had transformed the morning. For Charlotte, it had been an unforgettable experience, one that reinforced her love for creativity, intelligence, and subtle mischief. The secret signal had not only achieved its purpose, but had also strengthened the bond of trust and understanding between her and the young officer, a bond that would continue to shape their shared experiences in the palace for years to come. The moment had finally arrived when Princess Charlotte's secret plan required a bolder step. For weeks she had perfected the signal, anticipating the guard's reaction, imagining the subtle ways he could respond. Until now, the guard had only made discreet adjustments, invisible to everyone else, ensuring her comfort and safety. But Charlotte's latest gesture demanded more, a small act that technically broke the strict rules of royal protocol, something that no guard was supposed to do under any circumstance. Charlotte felt a thrill of excitement as she positioned herself in the center of the ceremonial hall. Her fingers hovered lightly in the prearranged pattern on her wrist, a delicate signal that only her trusted officer would recognize. To the audience, she was the perfect image of a composed young princess, standing tall and smiling graciously. Every bow, every wave, and every glance was impeccably timed. Yet beneath the surface, she was orchestrating a quiet act of rebellion, one that would test the guard's judgment and loyalty. The young officer noticed immediately. His eyes flicked toward Charlotte, registering the signal with the speed and precision of someone who had been trained to read subtle gestures over months of observation. He understood the weight of what she was asking. Royal protocol was strict. Guards were expected to follow orders, maintain their positions, and avoid any action that could draw attention or disrupt the ceremony. By responding to Charlotte's signal, he would technically be bending, or even breaking, the rules. He paused for a fraction of a second, calculating the risks. But then, as he looked into Charlotte's eyes, he saw the quiet confidence, the trust, and the playful challenge she had embedded in the gesture. He knew that this was not a moment of recklessness. It was a calculated act of cleverness, a test of discretion and skill. With a steady breath, he made his decision. He would act, even if it meant stepping outside the strict boundaries of his duty. The first part of his response was subtle. He adjusted his stance slightly, positioning himself closer to Charlotte than protocol allowed. To the casual observer, it looked like a minor shift in formation. But in reality, he had created a protective barrier, shielding her from the bustling crowd and the gaze of photographers who might capture a less-than-perfect image. Every step he took was carefully measured, balancing obedience with the need to respond to Charlotte's silent command. Charlotte noticed immediately. A small smile touched her lips, invisible to the public but full of satisfaction. The guard had understood her without words, and the quiet coordination between them gave her a sense of power and freedom within the confines of a rigid ceremony. It was exhilarating, the knowledge that she could communicate, influence, and even subtly bend the rules without anyone outside their small circle ever realizing it. The guard's next move required even more precision. A visiting dignitary had moved slightly closer to Charlotte, unaware of a small obstacle on the marble floor, a loose decorative rope that could trip someone if they were not careful. In strict protocol, a guard was not supposed to intervene in such situations unless danger was imminent. But Charlotte's signal indicated that he should act. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, discreetly moving the rope aside with his foot. The action was nearly invisible, yet it prevented a possible mishap. Charlotte's relief was quiet but genuine, and her eyes met his in a brief moment of acknowledgement. The crowd remained unaware of the subtle drama unfolding in their midst. They saw a flawless ceremony, dignified greetings, and a composed princess. but Charlotte felt the excitement of the moment intensify. Each movement of the guard was a confirmation that their silent communication was working perfectly. Each act of discretion, each small deviation from the rules, reinforced the bond of trust between them. It was not merely about comfort or safety. It was about creating a shared understanding, a secret story hidden within the public performance of royal life. As Charlotte continued to engage with the audience, the guard's vigilance never wavered. He moved in harmony with her steps, ensuring that the flow of the ceremony remained smooth. When she paused to greet a group of young children visiting the palace, he subtly adjusted the crowd around her, creating a small space so she could bend down and speak to them comfortably. Such gestures were technically beyond the guard's formal duties, yet he executed them with skill and discretion. Charlotte noticed and felt a quiet thrill. This was exactly the kind of clever, rule-bending support she had imagined when planning her signal. At one point, Charlotte needed to hand a small gift to a visiting child. Her hands were full, and the strict rules of ceremony did not allow a guard to assist directly in such personal interactions. But the signal she had sent allowed the officer to act. He stepped closer, offering a subtle, guiding presence without touching the princess or breaking his formal stance. His positioning allowed Charlotte to hand over the gift gracefully, ensuring the moment went smoothly. To the outside eye, everything appeared perfect. To Charlotte, it was a triumph of silent coordination. The audience, absorbed in the charm and poise of the young princess, had no idea of the careful orchestration behind the scenes. They did not see the small but significant choices the guard made to protect and assist Charlotte. They could not know that each adjustment, each slight bending of protocol, was the result of a secret signal, a shared understanding between two individuals who had learned to communicate without words. Charlotte felt a quiet sense of pride. This was more than just a playful act. It was a demonstration of intelligence, trust, and the subtle power of ingenuity. As the ceremony continued, Charlotte's next challenge arrived. The sun had shifted, casting a glare across the courtyard that made it difficult for her to maintain her composure while smiling for photographs. She gave a slight tilt of her head and a small flick of her wrist, a signal the guard had learned to recognize. Immediately, he adjusted his position, standing in such a way that his presence subtly shielded her from the sunlight. No one outside the small circle of awareness noticed the action, yet it made a tremendous difference to Charlotte's comfort. She could continue her engagement without squinting or fidgeting, and she felt a wave of quiet gratitude and excitement. The guard's attentiveness did not stop there. A group of officials was moving closer, speaking quietly among themselves, their footsteps brushing too near the polished marble floor. In a strict sense, he could not interfere with their movement. Yet the signal Charlotte had sent indicated the need for a gentle, protective action. The guard subtly positioned himself, creating a natural barrier that guided the officials to step slightly aside, preventing any accidental intrusion into Charlotte's space. Once again, the audience saw nothing unusual, but Charlotte was acutely aware of the clever execution of the plan. Charlotte's mind raced with appreciation and delight. She realized that these small acts, these minute deviations from strict protocol, were not just about comfort. They were about creating an experience where she could fully express her personality, her intelligence, and her playful spirit. The guard had not simply followed orders. He had understood her intentions, interpreted the signal, and acted with creativity and discretion. In doing so, he had made the entire event more fluid, more personal, and far more enjoyable for her. The excitement built further as Charlotte prepared to move to a more crowded area of the courtyard, where visitors and media representatives were gathered. Normally, guards were required to maintain strict lines of formation and avoid stepping outside their positions. But the princess's signal indicated that a slight adjustment was necessary to maintain her comfort and dignity. Without hesitation, the young officer shifted his stance, subtly guiding the flow of people around Charlotte while keeping his movements elegant and unobtrusive. The result was a seamless transition, maintaining the illusion of perfection while allowing the princess to navigate the space with ease. Charlotte could feel the exhilaration of the moment. Her signal had worked perfectly, and the guard's response had been flawless. She marveled at the power of silent communication, at the ability to bend rules without breaking them, and at the bond of trust that had been reinforced through this shared understanding. It was a lesson in intelligence, strategy, and creativity, all wrapped up in the formal and often rigid world of royal ceremony. As the morning progressed, the small acts of protocol breaking continued. The guard helped discreetly adjust Charlotte's dress when she sat on the ceremonial bench, guided her subtly through crowded areas, and positioned himself to shield her from distractions. Each action required a delicate balance of courage, skill, and awareness of social expectations. To the crowd, everything appeared perfect. To Charlotte, it was a thrilling confirmation of their clever teamwork, a secret victory hidden in plain sight. By the time the final greetings of the ceremony were complete, Charlotte felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The signal had been recognized and acted upon with precision. The rules of protocol had been bent, but never broken in a way that disrupted the ceremony. The guard had demonstrated not only obedience, but also judgment, creativity, and loyalty. Charlotte knew that this shared experience would remain a cherished memory, a story of trust and cleverness hidden within the formalities of royal life. As she prepared to leave the courtyard, Charlotte allowed herself a brief, private smile. She had orchestrated the moment perfectly, using her intelligence, foresight, and playful spirit to create an extraordinary day within the rigid framework of royal protocol. The guard's swift and skillful response had transformed a routine event into something memorable, full of quiet triumphs and small victories that no one outside their circle could ever fully appreciate. Walking away from the courtyard, Charlotte felt a sense of empowerment. She had navigated the constraints of tradition, engaged in a private game of signals and responses, and demonstrated that cleverness, trust, and subtle defiance could coexist within the structure of royal life. The experience had been exhilarating, a reminder that even in the most formal circumstances, creativity and intelligence could shine, quietly and brilliantly, for those willing to notice. As the royal family exited the courtyard, the formal event officially came to an end, but for Princess Charlotte, the day was far from over. The ceremony had gone perfectly. Every greeting and every bow had been executed with flawless precision, and the audience had left with the impression of a composed and graceful young princess. Yet behind the scenes, Charlotte's small act of cleverness and the guard's swift responses had created a story that no one else would ever fully know. It was a story of subtle signals, discreet actions, and a quiet defiance of strict protocol, all woven seamlessly into the tapestry of royal life. Charlotte's thoughts lingered on the events that had just unfolded. She felt a sense of quiet triumph, the kind that comes from knowing you have successfully executed a plan that required intelligence, timing, and trust. The small signal she had given to the young officer had led to a series of actions that were technically beyond what any guard was allowed to do. Each one had been executed perfectly, maintaining the appearance of order and decorum while subtly bending the rigid rules. To the outside world, everything had been proper and flawless, but Charlotte knew the truth, and that knowledge gave her a quiet, exhilarating satisfaction. The young guard walked beside her, his posture still impeccable, but his eyes reflected a shared understanding. There was a moment, brief and unspoken, where they both acknowledged the success of the secret signal. It was a look filled with trust and pride, a recognition of the cleverness and care that had guided every step of the morning. Charlotte smiled subtly, knowing that this silent communication was a bond that could not easily be broken. It was a moment that strengthened the trust between them, an unspoken promise that they could rely on each other in future moments, no matter how strict the rules of the palace might be. As they walked through the corridors of the palace, the staff and attendants went about their usual duties, unaware of the private story that had played out during the public ceremony. Some staff members commented on how lively and confident Charlotte had appeared, but none could see the intricate dance of signals and responses that had ensured her comfort and composure. To Charlotte, this was part of the charm, the knowledge that she could create a private narrative within a highly formal, highly visible environment. It was a reminder that even within strict boundaries, creativity and intelligence could thrive. Once the family had returned to the private rooms of the palace, Charlotte had a moment of quiet reflection. She allowed herself to relax, feeling the tension of the formal event melt away. The silk of her gown felt soft against her skin, and the polished floors, once intimidating in their perfection, now seemed welcoming. She thought about the young guard, about his attentiveness, his intelligence, and his willingness to act in ways that were both discreet and effective. Their partnership had been tested today, and it had succeeded beautifully. Charlotte felt a deep sense of gratitude and admiration for him, recognizing that trust, understanding, and cleverness were rare qualities, even within the walls of a palace. The staff, too, began to notice subtle changes in Charlotte's demeanor. She moved through the halls with a lightness and confidence that was even more pronounced than usual. Her laughter, quiet but genuine, echoed softly through the corridors. It was clear to those who worked closely with her that something had gone particularly well today. Yet no one could have guessed the secret behind her elevated spirits. The story of the signal, the guards' discreet interventions, and the small acts of bending protocol remained entirely private, a hidden layer of the day that belonged only to Charlotte and her trusted companion. Later, in a quieter moment, Charlotte reflected on the lessons she had learned. She realized that intelligence and playfulness could coexist with formality and tradition. Even in an environment as structured as the royal palace, there was room for creativity, subtlety, and personal expression. The secret signal had been more than a clever trick. It had been an exercise in communication, trust, and problem-solving. It had reminded her that rules, while important, could be navigated thoughtfully and carefully, and that small acts of ingenuity could create moments of joy and comfort without disrupting the greater order. The young guard, walking slightly behind Charlotte, felt a similar sense of satisfaction. He had acted with precision, intelligence, and discretion, responding to her signal without hesitation. Every decision he had made had required careful judgment, balancing the expectations of royal protocol with the needs and comfort of the princess. In doing so, he had strengthened his own understanding of responsibility, creativity, and trust. The experience had been a lesson in subtlety and perception, demonstrating that even within the strictest rules, there was room for thoughtful action and careful improvisation. As the day progressed, Charlotte found herself sharing small, quiet moments with the young officer, moments that allowed them to reflect on the morning's events. They spoke in whispers about the gestures, the positioning, and the timing that had made the signal successful. Each shared observation deepened their understanding of one another, reinforcing the trust and confidence that had guided their collaboration. Charlotte felt a sense of joy in knowing that this bond was unique, a private story hidden within the public life of the palace, a narrative that no one else could fully understand. In the following days, the palace staff began to recount the ceremony in their own way, praising Charlotte's poise, charm, and intelligence. The dignitaries spoke of her graceful interactions and confident presence. Yet the true story of the day, the secret signal, the guards' clever responses, and the subtle bending of protocol, remained entirely hidden. Charlotte and the young officer knew that they had shared something extraordinary, a private adventure that existed alongside the official record of the event. It was a reminder that even in a life defined by rules and appearances, moments of ingenuity and trust could create stories worth cherishing. Charlotte thought often about the nature of rules and creativity. She realized that rules were necessary, that they provided structure, safety, and order. Yet she also understood that creativity and intelligence thrived when one could find thoughtful ways to navigate boundaries. The signal had been a way to exercise judgment, insight, and courage, all qualities that would serve her well in future challenges. She felt proud of herself and the guard, knowing that together they had transformed a routine event into a memorable and meaningful experience. Over time, the incident became a private story that Charlotte recalled with quiet amusement and satisfaction. She remembered the exact moment she sent the signal, the guard's swift understanding, and the careful sequence of actions that followed. Each memory brought a smile to her face, a reminder of the cleverness, trust, and shared understanding that had made the day so special. For Charlotte, it was more than just a playful moment. It was a lesson in communication, observation, and the power of subtlety. The guard, too, reflected on the experience. He considered the trust Charlotte had placed in him, the responsibility he had assumed, and the creativity required to respond appropriately. It had been a test of character, skill, and judgment, and he had passed it with care and precision. The private understanding he shared with Charlotte had strengthened his confidence and his sense of purpose within the palace. It was a reminder that even the smallest actions, when guided by intelligence and integrity, could have a profound impact. In the weeks following the ceremony, Charlotte continued to practice small, subtle gestures and signals, exploring new ways to communicate with her trusted guard. Each signal, each response, was an opportunity to reinforce their bond, to exercise creativity, and to navigate the complexities of palace life with grace and intelligence. The memory of the event remained vivid, a source of inspiration and confidence that Charlotte carried with her in every public appearance. The palace staff, observing Charlotte's behavior, noticed an increase in her confidence and poise. Her interactions became smoother, her movements more assured, and her smile carried a quiet intelligence that seemed to captivate those around her. Yet no one knew the secret behind these changes, the private story of a clever signal, a loyal guard, and the quiet bending of rules that had allowed Charlotte to assert her individuality while maintaining the dignity expected of a princess. Charlotte often reflected on the importance of trust and collaboration. She realized that the bond she shared with the young officer was rare and valuable. It had been tested in a public setting, executed flawlessly, and had remained invisible to everyone else. The experience had reinforced her belief in the power of silent communication, careful observation, and thoughtful action. It was a story she would carry with her, a reminder that intelligence, creativity, and trust could coexist with tradition and formality. As the months went by, Charlotte found herself recalling the incident whenever she faced challenges within the palace. It became a touchstone, a private example of how careful planning, observation, and communication could create positive outcomes, even within rigid structures. The memory of the guard's discreet actions and her own clever signaling provided her with confidence, reminding her that she had the ability to navigate complex situations with grace, intelligence, and subtle ingenuity. Charlotte also recognized the importance of subtle rebellion within limits. The signal had been a small act, a tiny bending of the rules, but it had achieved a significant result. It had allowed her to assert her personality, ensure her comfort, and deepen a bond of trust, all while maintaining the appearance of flawless propriety. The experience taught her that cleverness and creativity could coexist with discipline and structure, providing a sense of empowerment that would serve her throughout her life. In quiet moments, Charlotte and the guard would sometimes exchange knowing looks, a silent acknowledgement of the story they shared. These moments were brief, subtle, and entirely private, yet they carried a profound sense of connection and understanding. It was a reminder that even in the most structured environments, there could be room for individuality, ingenuity, and trust. The signal had been a simple gesture, but it had created a lasting impact, a story of cleverness, loyalty, and quiet triumph that neither time nor circumstance could erase. Charlotte's reflection on the event often extended beyond the palace walls. She thought about how intelligence, observation, and creativity could help navigate any situation in life. The signal and the guard's response had been a small example of a larger lesson. That careful planning, trust, and the ability to read subtle cues could turn ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. The event had shown her that even in highly structured environments, it was possible to create personal victories and meaningful connections without disrupting the greater order. The guard, too, carried the memory of that day with pride. He had acted with skill, discretion, and loyalty, demonstrating that intelligence and careful judgment were just as important as obedience and discipline. The success of the signal had been a personal achievement, reinforcing his understanding of responsibility, trust, and the quiet power of thoughtful action. It was a memory he would treasure, a story of collaboration and understanding hidden beneath the formal surface of royal life. As time passed, the private story of the signal became a touchstone for both Charlotte and the guard. It reminded them of the power of subtle communication, the importance of trust, and the value of careful observation. The event had been more than a playful moment. It had been a lesson in intelligence, courage, and discretion. Charlotte had learned that even small gestures, when executed with thoughtfulness and precision, could create meaningful and memorable experiences. In the end, the day remained a perfect example of balance, between tradition and creativity, between discipline and subtle rebellion, between formality and personal expression. Charlotte had navigated a public event flawlessly, Yet she had also created a private narrative of cleverness, trust, and ingenuity. The young guard had responded with skill and loyalty, proving that careful observation and thoughtful action could make all the difference. Together, they had turned a routine ceremony into a memorable story, one that would remain hidden in plain sight, cherished privately, and remembered as a quiet triumph of intelligence, trust, and subtle ingenuity.